Welcome to It's Our Money with Ellen Brown, a look behind the curtain of global finance and monetary control with one of the foremost experts in the field. Author of the bestseller Web of Debt and the Public Bank Solution, Ellen Brown's groundbreaking work began the movement to create new American public banks. We'll look at issues surrounding the world of money and the systems and powers that control it, as well as the progress being made on the public banking frontier. The program is underwritten by Public Banking Associates, a national consultancy of experts advising government leaders pursuing the creation of their own public banks at publicbankingassociates.com.
The Bank of Canada no longer was able to lend the government near debt-free money. We had to borrow in the market, and then with a figure that from 1974-75 fiscal year to 2013-14, that we paid $1.37 trillion in interest, of which none was necessary. We didn't need to do that. We owned the patent, but in effect, we gave away the rights to some private individuals and used the middleman, and it's cost us dearly. So now is the time to try and do something.
Hello and welcome to It's Our Money with Ellen Brown. I'm Walt McCree, Ellen's co-host and colleague at the Public Banking Institute. Our opening comments about what happened to the Bank of Canada and Canadian monetary sovereignty come from the Honorable Paul Hellyer, the longest-serving Parliamentarian of Canada, its former defense minister, among other high government posts. He's an author of 17 books, and he is now almost 100 years old. When you get the chance to debrief such a notable leader about what he has seen and what he knows, it's a special honor. So today, Ellen talks with Paul Hellyer about a variety of his insights and exclusive bits of knowledge, some of which are quite remarkable. For example, his opening remarks we just heard dealt with how the international monetary cartel of central banks extracted well over $1 trillion in interest on Canada's national debt, which didn't have to be. The United States has a similar situation. Canada built its enormous infrastructure and national economic strength without the need for such debt because Canada has, or at least it had, a publicly owned central bank. Until 1974, when it handed over its monetary sovereignty to a globalist cabal that is consolidating power all over the planet now through a variety of privately held corporations, banks, media conglomerates, and governments. In the current economic stress of this pandemic, failing infrastructure, and economic stability, we in the U.S. have some important choices to make. Will we reclaim our sovereign right to create the money we need for survival and thriving, or will we continue to let our monetary wealth be extracted by private profiteers who are upending the economic apple cart that used to serve us all? We'll talk with Paul Hellyer in a few moments. But let's go now to talk with Ellen about 2020 and what we might have to look forward to in 2021, and perhaps whether we'll be able to take up Paul Hellyer's admonition to do something to reclaim control of our money and our democracy. So, Ellen, here we are at the end of another exciting year. We've had several in a row. People have not liked this one at all for the most part, but here we are. And when we take a snapshot look at what's happened amidst a crisis, a global crisis, this one has disabled economies all over the world, ours, of course, among them. And what we've noticed, and what you pointed out, is that our system has failed us, is that the Federal Reserve has stepped up to the plate for their clients, for the big banks and the corporations, and that the money didn't get to Main Street. Their programs were inadequate and inefficient and too costly in some cases. Businesses are out of business. This has been a cataclysm of a monetary failure, structural, systemic failure. Anything good you'd like to say about it?
Well, I would say to that, I wouldn't say it's necessarily the Federal Reserve's fault, because it's the way our Federal Reserve Act is structured, or the way the whole system is structured. Was the subject of my last article, that the Fed really has no way to put money into the real economy. They can only pump it into the banks by buying assets off the banks if they want to do quantitative easing. And then, of course, they were real good to the banks in other ways, dropping interest rates down to near zero, eliminating the reserve requirement, opening up the discount window without penalty, et cetera. All things that we think we'd like to be able to tap into as well with the public banking system. But anyway, it is a systemic failure. We need to redesign the system. I just saw that billionaires just got another $1 trillion in assets since March. So they are collectively worth $4 trillion. And the lower half of the economy is only worth $2 trillion. So they've just this handful of, well, it's not a handful, I guess it's several hundred, but just these billionaires are worth double what the poorest half of the economy holds. Yeah. So among those billionaires, 4 billionaires have more than $100 billion. It's Jeff Bezos of Amazon, Zuckerberg of Facebook, Elon Musk of Tesla, and Bill Gates, who used to be of Microsoft and is now the vaccine czar. So $100 billion. What do you?
They have $1 trillion collectively. They've increased.
Oh, no, it's not just those 4. Yeah, there are several hundred.
Well, it's a lot of money, and they've generated in the last couple of months while everybody else is starving.
Yeah, clearly our whole system, there's something wrong with, we call it capitalism, but it's not the capitalism that we all liked when we were children, that we were indoctrinated in, or the capitalism that set up the country, which was small farmers, small businesses competing with each other. With that, we like. But the 98,000, I believe, businesses have gone under this year, never start up again. So the way we structured the economy right now, the big businesses survived and small businesses were forced into bankruptcy. So we don't have small business capitalism anymore. We don't have mom and pop capitalism. What we have is big corporate monopoly capitalism, and those monopolies are getting bigger than they've ever gotten. I mean, we have a greater wealth disparity this year than we've ever had. So what do we do about it? The Fed itself has said, they've been begging Congress for a stimulus because they really don't have the power to get the money out there. The reason is all they can do is help the banks, and the banks in turn are not passing those benefits on to the people. They're not making 0.25 or 1% loans or 2% loans to businesses, but a public banking system would, and that's what we argue, that if we had public banks that were mandated to make loans into the local economy, they would and could without taking a loss, because their own costs are much lower than private banks. They don't have shareholders bleeding out the profits. They don't have high paid CEOs, et cetera. Yeah. All those benefits that we know public banks have.
So at the turn of this year, and as we look into a new administration with different priorities, presumably, or hopefully anyway, and having the public interest in there a little bit higher up in the rungs, we have a new leader at the Treasury who was Janet Yellen at the Fed. We think she's a nice person. She's a good person. We'll see whether or not she is willing to take a leap towards some new policy, and that our Treasury, as we look at public laws that are coming forward, like the Public Banking Act, the National Infrastructure Bank Act, the Postal Banking Act, and other momentums toward us reevaluating and reconstructing a monetary system for the people. And the Federal Reserve is certainly a very big part of that. That's going to have to change its stripes somehow, which is tough for it to do since its clients are the big banks. The owners literally are the big banks. But the people are going to have to be outspoken in this coming year, I think. And those of us in the public banking arena see huge opportunities, but really great momentum in developing a path forward. You mentioned something that I think that is important about your interview with Paul Hellyer in just a couple of minutes. He makes the point as well. Paul is a 97-year-old man, almost 100 years old. And has seen it all and knows where the skeletons are, and he knows, stuff that people otherwise don't know as a former government official, head of the Defense Department and so forth. In your interview, he really makes the point pretty clear that that we are really pawns in a much bigger game.
Yeah, no, I agree. And what do we do about it? That is, so we have a challenging year coming up for sure, but we need a populist movement of some sort. And we need for people to understand what's really happening here and what has gone wrong. I mean, we've got the numbers in terms of, they've got the money, but we've got the numbers. If we could enlighten people on what the real problem is and what the fix would be. So anyway, it's cut out for us, but
yeah, well, it's going to be 2021. It's going to be an exciting year. And I think I know both of us are optimistic that some of these initiatives, legislative initiatives, and local and regional state developments for public banks are going to actually get some traction that will get something specific moving forward for some new prospects. New understandings is also at the heart of whether or not the people will move in that direction. And we need to understand that the Fed is our central bank, that the Treasury is our money, and that we have to insist on getting our share and supporting and not putting up with this continued poverty and deprivation that we're living with, where a handful of people are having everything they want. Ellen, let's talk with Paul Hellyer, this remarkable 100-year-old guy who's brilliant. Really? It's going to be great. We'll talk next time and look forward to what's happening next.
And season's greetings to all.
Thanks, Ellen.
It's my pleasure to be talking to the Honorable Paul Hellyer, who is longest serving members of the Canadian Parliament, House of Commons. I think he started in 1949, where at one point you were defense minister or associate defense minister. And you've written 17 books, which absolutely is amazing, considering at least three of them have been in your 90s. And revealing your age, you're 97 years old.
Wow.
I've had some relatives who lived to that age, but there's no way they could have written a book. I'd love to ask you, what's your secret of remaining sharp and productive?
Well, I had to do it this spring because of the pandemic. And you and I are both interested in money and the way the economy works and so on. And I said to myself, there's going to be a meltdown. It's going to be a serious one, and it could result in another recession or worse. And so if ever we're going to change the system, now is the time to try. And so that actually was a bit of a blessing, because it gave me something to do during the winter. I got up in the morning with the vim, vigor, and vitality, and went to work, and so I didn't have to worry about the virus, and just went about my business.
That's great. So I interviewed you earlier on your book, The Money Mafia. So I think it might have been 4 years ago I interviewed you on that, which was quite discursive, covered the whole field of money and what's wrong with it. But now your latest book is called Liberated. Liberation. I saw it both ways. I'm not sure which. Well,
it's a funny thing. We won't spend a lot of time on it. We had the book finished, and it was copyright is liberated, but we hadn't looked at the cover, which said liberation.
Okay, Liberation: The Economics of Hope. Great title. So obviously, it's you've got a lot in there about money and finances and your proposed solutions, and I definitely want to hear all of that. But you covered other things as well, basically what's wrong with the world and different things you learned when you were worked in the defense ministry, I guess in government, you had access to some things that other people don't have access to.
Actually, it's mostly what I've learned in the last 15 years.
Okay.
What one of my very generous friends said was the equivalent of 3 PhDs writing these 4 books in the last 10 or 12 years. And it's very, practically none of it is what I learned when I was in the business, because the people who have the inside information don't always tell the ministers. And so consequently, the politicians can be very much in the dark, as many of yours are. Most of them, in fact, most of the people in the Congress wouldn't have a clue what's going on. And I've been working assiduously during this period, starting in 2005. And so what I know now is really what I've learned in those years. And on my first book on the series, Light at the End of the Tunnel, The Survival Plan for the Human Species, was the first one where I introduced what I call the broader reality. So that you get away from the idea that Earth is the center of the universe and that we're the most advanced and the best and all that sort of thing, and get into a reality which says, well, you're not. You're one of the least advanced, and you're way behind the times, and so you've got a lot of catching up to do and that sort of thing. So I wrote that 10 years ago, and I thought it was my magnus opum, as they say, because I put in all I knew. But 4 years later, when I wrote the Money Mafia, I had learned so much about what was going on in the United States and the world and the universe and what the New World Order people were trying to do to us and what they had in store for us, that I said, I've got to write this. And so this was my second last book. Later,
You've done 3, haven't you?
I
Plus
got
your
the number
autobiography.
3 of last books, and the one that's just published now is my 4th last and final book.
I've still got my magnum opus hanging up there. No, I can't go yet. I can't go yet because I haven't written my magnum opus yet.
Oh.
No, that thing that you have notes for all over the place that you know you're going to write one day, but you don't get to it. But that's great. You actually churned them out, and I mean, you're just still so sharp, which is so impressive. My mother lived to be 97, but her memory was gone, and you know, she actually was sharp. She knew what was happening, but she couldn't have written a book. I'm just thoroughly impressed with your output and your life in general. One thing I forgot to mention, you founded the Canadian Action Party, I think in 1997, which among other things has promoted government issued money, which of course is what we're all about too, public banking, that the government should own the banks. Or I know you were also instrumental in the lawsuit that was brought by Rocco Gelati, or he was the attorney rather, brought by Comer, the monetary economic reform, something like that. Yeah. In order to with the idea of going back to letting the government borrow directly from the central bank, interest free. But I guess I know that the lawsuit failed, but can you tell me what the grounds were?
Well, it failed because it was, and I say this with deference and respect, ill-conceived. It was they were suing the bank, and they should have been suing the politicians.
Oh, the bank didn't have the power, right? Okay.
Well, no, the bank has to go by the law.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in effect, that's what the judges said, that the Bank of Canada is observing the Bank of Canada Act. It's not doing anything illegal. And they didn't rule on whether what they were doing was smart or not, because that wasn't their mandate. Besides, judges don't understand monetary policy. They don't know what money in banking is all about, except whether their bank account's open or full of money or empty or whatever. And so it was not framed in a way that was really allowed to succeed, in my opinion. And a lot of money was spent on it, and that's a shame, because Bill Krem spent a fortune on this thing, and it produced nothing. And so it was sort of taken as a setback. But the people we have to go after are the politicians, because the government of Canada has the power to create money if it wants to, by whatever means it wants to. And its sovereignty. We talk now about the sovereign debt. You probably saw the thing the other day that said the sovereign debt in the world was going to hit 280 trillion this year.
Wow.
And that's a big chunk.
Mm-hmm.
And similarly, our sovereignty comes from the idea that the kings and queens used to be able to produce all of the money. And then when we said, no, you can't run things anymore, we have to do that democratically, that power came down to the people in charge politically. And so Graham Towers, the first, in my opinion, brightest of all of our governors of the Bank of Canada, made it very clear that he had a system that worked beautifully, as you well know, from 1939 to 1974. And we were able to produce a huge war effort far beyond our size and population, and the fourth largest navy in the world, and so on. And then after the war, to build our share of the St. Lawrence Seaway, which was the expensive part, and the Trans-Canada Highway, and new air terminals, and other things, both for ourselves and the provinces.
Your national health care system, which we desperately need.
Pardon me?
Your national health care system.
Oh yeah, sure, these things were all part of it. And as you well know, we didn't have to borrow. No, that's not. We didn't go further in debt. We managed to stay out of debt because the Bank of Canada had a real deal for us. They bought our bonds. We paid low interest rates to them, and then they gave us the money back as dividends because we owned the shares. So all that was lost, and when I write about this, I don't say debt-free money for that. I say near debt-free money because it was as close as you can get. Mm-hmm. And they created a huge amount of it until 1974, and then they bought into this idea of globalization and only one world economy, and we should go along with the Bank for International Settlements, even they're trying to put the screws to us, and so as a result of that, we were no longer, or the Bank of Canada no longer was able, or so it thought, to lend the government near debt-free money. We had to borrow in the market. And then when you phoned me and said, do you know how much interest you've paid on that in the last few years? You know, I came very, very close to not believing you. Because you said over $10 trillion in interest. And I said, hey, that's a lot of interest. But I still had access to the research department at the Parliament of Canada, so I sent it to them, and I had them do it twice. And I think the last time was that they came up with a figure that from 1974-75 fiscal year to 2013-14, that we paid $1.37 trillion in interest, of which none was necessary. We didn't need to do that. We owned the patent, but in effect, we gave away the rights to some private individuals and used the middleman, and it's cost us dearly. And I'm afraid it's going to do so again when they get this all through and start raising the interest rates. So now is the time to try and do something. And
yeah, crisis times are when things change. We know they're going to change, so we need to grab it and make sure it changes for the public.
The chap that I met in Comer, who was an economist, I asked the people at Comer if we got an honest to goodness economist. They said, we'll find one for you. So they found one, and down near Kingston. And I went down, talked to him, and we got along swimmingly. And he said, finally, he said, a politician who gets it. And I was polite enough not to say, finally, an economist who gets it.
You could have, though.
I could have and would have, but I wanted his goodwill at the time. And we worked together on this system, which was very simple, that instead of giving the central bank bonds, that you give them non-convertible, non-redeemable shares in the country. And this is simply because the Rothschilds, the way they've got the system set up with central banks, you don't try and tear down the whole system, but you make it work for you. And the way to get this to work for you is, instead of having to give them a bond, you give them a
share
in the country, appropriate, nominal numbers that fit the situation, and do that way. And then you don't have to ever pay the money back. It is de facto debt-free, government-created money.
Now, is there these shares don't go on the open market, I assume? There's no chance that China would buy them up and own your country?
They're non-transferable.
Okay.
You've got all the bases covered there. And they couldn't sell them if they wanted to, because they're not allowed to.
So it's only the central bank that can buy them, is that correct?
They can use them
It
as
gets the shares in exchange for.
This is how they will balance their book, is by having shares equal to the money they create, instead of equal to the bonds that they get used to create money. So
yeah, I've seen that argument numerous times in the Comer Journal about that, that the accounting isn't correct. I mean, we don't count all the assets that the government has on one side of their books. We only count the debt on the other side.
Yeah, but when it comes to making money, when I say making money, I mean printing money, creating money, manufacturing money, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but so you print the money and balance it against all those assets that are the country, that the country.
The assets are the collateral.
Or the stock, yeah.
It's like when you go to the bank and want to borrow money, they say, do you have stocks and bonds? No. Second mortgage on your house? No. A rich relative that'll co-sign? Okay. And then they get you to sign a note, payable on demand, and charge you prime plus a little bit. As I always laughingly say, depending on the color of your eyes, and then they give you the loan. But then you've got to pay it back. And just as they create the money, and this is one of the myths in my book, excuse me, I'll get a little bit of water here. And just as the way the banks create money out of nothing, because they're just, as Graham Towers said, well, he said, money is nothing but a book entry. And now if he were alive, he would say money is nothing but a computer entry. That's all it is. So instead of this being permanent money, this is all virtual money. So if you have a meltdown, as we have every once in a while, usually at the instigation of the banking system, and the assets decline in value, then you have to pay off some of those loans, and that destroys money. Just like taking a lot of money and putting it in a wheelbarrow and shoveling it into a furnace. And then there's not enough for the system to operate. But basically what we're looking at, we have a system which is more insane than insane, if you can really say that. And you can. It is a human disaster. And we've got to change it. And we've got to give politicians an extra chance, an extra choice. Today, if you want to spend money on the COVID-19 or whatever, you have to tax it or borrow it. And tomorrow, if you want to build new healthcare facilities for the aged, because the ones we've got now are an absolute disaster, you have to tax it or borrow it. And so it is with all of the things that you have to do for your infrastructure and your new projects and your enlarged systems for distribution of income, whatever you want, a minimum annual wage, whatever it is, you have to tax it or borrow it unless you have a cash stream coming in that's big enough to allow governments to balance their budgets without higher taxes and maybe with lower taxes and without borrowing. You don't have to go into debt further at all. And the system we proposed 8 years ago for the Tory government that was in power at the time was to create $150 billion a year and split it 50-50 between the federal government and the provinces for 7 years in order to reinstate cash reserves in the banking system, because now they have none. And so we would reinstate the reserves by 5% a year, which would mean that the money wouldn't be inflationary, because it's a big bugaboo of a lot of the critics of government created money. And you do that for 7 years until you get 34% of cash reserves in the banks. And you accomplish so many things. You'd have 7 years in which people could, the politicians could start makeup of the lack of new hospitals, the increased hospitals, and old folks' homes and bridges and whatever needs to be done. And you'd have a steady cash stream, and you know you're going to have it, so you wouldn't have to. And in our country, which is a federation, you wouldn't have to go begging at 3 different levels of government to say please, because it usually takes about a year or 2 just to get through all the paperwork. You're just handing out the cash, and they could do it right away because they have control. And now in my present book, the Liberated or Liberation, the Economics of Hope, I just make one small change in that. And that is that I would split it 100, take the 100% and have 50% for the federal government and 25% for the states or provinces and 25% for the municipalities. And the reason for that is that, and you never stop learning, at least I hope not, I find that every once in a while, the provincial premier, you hear my voice, the provincial premier won't like the mayor of a big city. So they starve them. And what it would do if you split 25-25 between the states or provinces and the municipalities, it means that the big cities would have cash flow to do the things that they need, whether it's improving public transportation or building more affordable housing, which is probably one of the top priorities as far as we're concerned here in our town of Toronto. And know that you're going to be able to do it. And then at the end of the 7 years, the new money, whatever is created each year, is divided on that ratio, 34% to government and the balance to the banks, so that they have enough leverage to look after small business and that sort of thing. And the other thing, and you appreciate this, what we're talking about here is leverage. And when the Bank of England was chartered, and the king had to bribe the shareholders by allowing them to lend the same money twice. That's when the larceny began. The ratio was 2 to 1. Well, then the wise guys running the Bank of International Settlements, and these being the rich elite bankers with whom you were very familiar, have managed over the years to get the wool pulled over the politicians' eyes and got it up to 20 to 1. It was, of course, much higher than that in some cases, as you well know. But then they sort of settled on the 20 to 1 ratio.
You're in US 10 to 1, but
Only 10 to 1 in the US?
Well, until now, we have no reserve requirement. The Fed just got rid of the reserve requirement in March to free the banks up. So
anyway, whatever it is, you get a fair deal between the owners of the patent to create money and the banks. And you can still have this huge industry without having to fire everybody involved in the huge industry that provides some reasonable services. You can keep that. And most of the people that work in a bank are very nice people, I find. But the people who are in charge of the banking system and who are in charge of the Bank for International Settlements and who set the rules, I don't have much time for them. And they, until we get that ratio down, they have more power than the President of the United States. And they're using it. And they're not using it for the benefit of the world. They're using it in various clandestine ways. And now, of course, and I think you mentioned the BlackRock and so on, they're going around buying up all the properties and kicking out all of the poor people. And that's not the way we should be going. To have
I think that might be Blackstone, but Blackstone is, I mean, there are two different entities, but BlackRock was an offshoot from Blackstone.
BlackRock, which are we talking?
Blackstone's the one that's buying up all the properties and renting them back to the previous owners at exorbitant rates. BlackRock does the exchange traded funds, the ETFs that anyway.
You're running out of time?
Myself. Anyway, they're investors, they're the ones that manage the pension funds, which is different.
They do a lot of funny things. I noticed, though. They start creating these manufacturing, these ways of creating money without adding any value.
Yeah. Well, I agree. It's the money system definitely needs reforming. So your proposals, you have other proposals as well. I recommend the reader look at your book, Liberation, the Economics of Hope, or Liberated, the Economics of Hope, as you prefer, to get the details, because it is kind of, it's kind of hard to follow in an interview. But I wonder what else you'd like to say in the way of solutions, or even looking back over your life, things that you'd like to check out there.
What I'm, you may or may not have noticed that instead of an introduction to the book, I have a section called Disclosure.
I know you're famous for that.
And what I say,
you're notorious.
What I say is I'm at an age where I have to share what I know. And so in the first section of the book, I share the fact that the United States is in deep trouble because after World War II, when most of us thought we'd won, all of a sudden we find out we didn't. We lost. And the Germans, who knew that they were not going to win, went underground. And they built a base in Antarctica. And the United States knew about it, sent a flotilla down to wipe it out. But a couple of flying saucers either German or from one of the extraterrestrials, came out of the water, sunk a ship, killed some people, and the flotilla had to come home. And Admiral Byrd, who was in charge, was so absolutely livid, he wanted to nuke them, which is understandable. But by the time he got back to the United States, the results of Operation Paperclip had taken over. And Operation Paperclip was when, at the end of the war, the United States officials decided they should get the best scientists and so on from Germany to help them fight the Cold War against the Soviets. And so they brought in a lot of people. And even though President Truman said, don't bring in anybody with a Nazi background, they paid no attention to that. And then they brought in a lot of them, and they gave them new CVs, new names. And the reason it's called Operation Paperclip is because that was the paperclip that they used with their old CVs, their new CVs, until the CIA destroyed them later. And then they appointed them to high office, both military and civil. And so by the time Admiral Byrd got back, they were in command and had enough influence to see that there was no attempt.
Disclosure, right, yeah.
And then later on, and this is a long story. We can't do any more than touch on it. They have developed that into what I call a cabal, and I think it's usually referred to as a cabal now, where you have a group of people from the Bavarian Illuminati to the Three Sisters, as I call them, the Bilderbergers, the Council on Foreign Relations, and the Trilateral Commission. And then included in that group is the banking cartel and the oil cartel, and then the transnational corporations.
Arguably the pharmaceutical, medical.
Oh, yeah. The whole business, the whole kit and caboodle, it's all part of it. And then you get down to the spies, and they involve the NSA and the FBI, CIA, which is the most Nazi of all, because when Allen Dulles was the head, he and his brother brought in all kinds of them, and they thoroughly took over that organization. I say it has to be disbanded totally, not a little bit. You can't reform it. It's too deeply ingrained there. You have to totally, and then after the intelligence organization, forgot the MI6 and the Israeli Mossad, they're all in on it. And then a huge swath of the US military, huge, especially the Air Force and the Navy, but the Army to a lesser extent. And they all are part of a cabal that has adopted this, well, it's almost like a religion. And that's a Nazi religion. And they have a plan. They called it the New World Order. President Bush Sr. announced it as something that I thought, gosh, this is great. They're going to have a world where all the little children have enough to eat and good health care and education and shirts on their backs and so on. That wasn't what they were talking about. And this is in the money mafia, as you know. And So instead of that, they're talking about a world government that is unelected and unaccountable to anyone except the rich elite, because it's being written for, by, and by them for their benefit. And whether you call it fascist or the Fourth Reich doesn't really matter. But it's a control, and it's been mentioned.
Even a corporatocracy, I think that's what.
Pardon me?
A corporatocracy, government by corporations, which is.
Oh, yeah, well, that's a good way of putting it. But they are in command, and especially the military part now, I think, is of considerable concern. And the only way to cope with it on the part of the ordinary citizen, the only way you can take back the United States is to defund the military. And I'm recommending 50% reduction, because they're spending just gobs of money, and they have been for a long, long time, to build their space fleet. And there's no military power on earth that could touch it. But if the Congress really wanted to defund it and look and see what's going on, and in my book, I recommend having bipartisan committees, because it's got to be bipartisan. This is not a partisan issue. This is a people issue, and it's really whether or not the people of the United States are going to live or die, and whether the United States is going to continue as an independent republic or be taken over as part of this new world order that is being pushed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you put that to the American people and we got to vote yes or no, it would pass easily. I mean, the American people in general want that. But the problem is we elect representatives who supposedly represent our interests, and then they come under the influence of big lobbyists, or maybe it was the big lobbyists that funded their election in the first place. And they don't vote the way that the people, the way that their constituents want.
That's your problem, but we have to try and educate them before it's too late. And I list in the book 2 or 3 of the military organizations that have to be looked at, because they're preparing.
I saw you put DARPA in there. I think they're DARPA.
4 or 5 ways to kill us, and any one of them will do it. So we have to pry open all of these doors and find out what's behind them. And there are a lot of whistleblowers out there who want to tell the truth, and who will really create, what, if they start to do it. But they've got to, and of course they have to be given protection. They need an amnesty in order to be able to speak freely, because the number of crimes they've committed in the last 50 years is just unbelievable. And it's got to be done. When I say now, I mean as soon as possible, because time is getting short. Our atomic clock is a minute to midnight, and we haven't got a lot of time to fool around.
Yeah, I saw you had quoted Catherine Austin Fitts, and one of her things is, I've forgotten the number, FASB something, but anyway, it's a bill that basically means that they don't have to report their budget. They don't have to balance their books or show what happened to the missing money. And we, the people.
Talking about the Fed.
Yeah.
Right?
Say it again.
You're talking about the Fed.
The military.
Oh, the military.
Yeah.
They have to get their money.
But there's all this leakage. I mean, they had documented 21 trillion, but she says it's up to 45 trillion or more. That's just missing money. It's never been accounted for. And they just call it some sort of bookkeeping error, but they don't have to account. There's a new law passed early this year, I think, FASB something, FASB, and I've forgotten the number. But But anyway, it means that they don't have to demonstrate that they have balanced their books, or they don't have to reveal where the money went.
Well, that's because they're in charge.
Yeah.
That's what I've been trying to say in my own.
Yeah. Now, she said one time, she said she had met these people when she was working as assistant secretary of HUD, that she had met some of these military people and she thought they were aliens because they had no empathy. You know, there was just, and I've heard a couple of other people say that as well, that, you know, they're just not quite human. They could
there's a lot
infiltrated. Yeah.
There are a lot of people I know. Ken Kasten has said he thinks that most of Hitler's army were robots.
Really? Wow.
And that's because he could never have put together an army of people that looked all the same and were those thousands and thousands of people. And of course, Dr. Wolf, who had a very, very high clearance, said before he died in a radio broadcast that they could make a 20-year-old person in a year in a glass round glass thing like this. Just grow a person.
Wow.
And so if you need an army, well, you just get a few thousand of those and
clones. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the problem is, as you suggest, if they have no humanity, they don't care. And some of us still think that the most important thing in life is to be caring and compassionate and so on. And of course, at the end of nearly all my books, I say that spirituality is the real problem, and this is a spiritual fight between the creator of the cosmos and his errant son, and they're vying for attention in some areas, and the son has been in almost complete control of most of the earth for quite a while now. And in my first of those 4 books that I mentioned, I said, Mammon rules the world. In other words, money, power, rule the world. And that's the way it has been. And we have to change that individually and collectively and start caring about people because we should, I guess. That's the reason.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's what it is to be human, to have empathy, to have, you know, we are social animals, which makes you wonder about all this social distancing where we're not allowed to. I mean, I live alone. The last time I hugged somebody, I don't get to hug my grandchild, etc. You know, things that normal people do, or Christmas and Thanksgiving. I mean, that is our humanity, that sort of collective empathy for your group and for your nation, etc.
Absolutely. And this is and the problem with this thing, of course, is that this is a weapon of war. And I say in the book, it was first manufactured in the United States, and then they worked in cooperation with the Wuhan group. And I think when Congress finally looks at it, if they ever do, they'll find that there was some American financing involved as well. And
Professor Lieber, apparently.
and the question I would ask to Congress to look at is who authorized it? Who said they should create weapons of mass destruction? Have they any more? Have they got some others coming along? One of the former NASA chiefs said that the next one could be extraterrestrial, it could be worse. How does he know? Who told him? A lot of questions we've got to ask. And that's the reason we've got to get, if possible, some bipartisan support to start asking questions for a change.
Yeah, that's my sense too. People say, what can we do? Well, the first thing we have to do is get information out there, because in a democracy, you can't make an educated vote if you don't know what's really going on. I mean, so that's what you and I do. We write. You've done a lot more than that, but I write.
Well, this funny thing, Allen Dulles was asked how he could sneak so many Nazis into the United States. And he said it's because Americans don't read books.
Wow.
But I would say neither do Canadians.
Yeah, well, and what you do read is censored these days. So you're not really getting, it's not the sort of free press that we had at one time. We need our Bill of Rights, the freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly.
You don't really have a free press at all, because every English language outlet, either print or electronic, is owned or controlled by Bilderberger, and they decide what's in them. So that the cabal that I'm talking about runs the press. And they're the ones that have pulled the wool over our eyes for the last 70 years and said that people don't have to know what's going on, and we're not going to tell them. Not going to tell them where we get the money for the space fleet. We're not going to tell them. But a lot of the information is out there if people start digging for it. And there are a lot of good books. I have a glossary in my book of 2 pages of books that I recommend, written by people who have some knowledge. And if anybody would read 6 or 8 of those, they would know quite a bit about what's going on.
Okay, that's great. Well, it looks like I have to wrap up here because I'm late at time. So it's been super talking to you. I'm so impressed with your work and all that you've achieved in your life and your latest book. Is there more you'd like to say?
Well, I would urge people to get my latest book and take a look at it carefully. And I urge them too, just to sort of inch way into these things, because I would guess that majority of the members of Congress have absolutely no idea what we're talking about. And that's a pity. They have to take small bites at a time and then get in and find out what the score is before it's too late, because that's what they're allegedly paid to do.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Great to see you, Ellen.
I've been speaking with the Honorable Paul Hellyer, who was former defense minister in Canada and has written 17 books. His latest book, written in the last year or so, is called Liberated, The Economics of Hope.
Well, that's it for this edition of It's Our Money with Ellen Brown. Our thanks to our guests, our sponsor, Public Banking Associates, and to you for listening. Be sure to check out Ellen's latest writings on the economy and the changing world of money by visiting ellenbrown.com. And for more information on public banking, visit publicbankinginstitute.org. For information on how local and state government leaders can obtain professional insight and counsel about public banks from key national experts, visit publicbankingassociates.com. I'm Walt McCree. See you next time on It's Our Money with Ellen Brown.